But you're all here tonight to hear Chris. Chris is a new rover, and he recently backpacked the Resurrection Pass Trail in Alaska, and he wants to tell us about some of the lessons that he's learned. Chris was born and raised in Anchorage, but he's lived in Minnesota most of his adult life. He still loves Alaska and loves to go back and be in the mountains and be above the timberline. And he's lucky because he's got family in Alaska and he can use them as a base of operations and go have his adventures. And he usually does this with his with one or more of his now adult kids. Chris has also hiked in Colorado and in the Grand Canyon.
Thank you. Good evening, Minnesota Rovers. I'm a new member, as mentioned, but I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for helping me out this evening, get things set up. And also in the events I've been to this summer, it's just been outstanding. And we're going to talk a little about later in this discussion about volunteering for the Rovers and how that's benefited me. So we're going to swing back around on that. But hey, let's get started and talk about the Resurrection Pass Trail. I hope you enjoy this, and let's have some fun with that. If you have questions along the way, we'll do our best to answer them and work through the technical issues. So feel free to type them in or however you submit your questions. And you don't need to wait till the end. So feel free to jump in when you need to. So a little bit about me and my experience. As it was mentioned, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and that's where I first started backpacking. And back then, I don't think we called it backpacking or camping. In fact, I don't think we had camping in Alaska like we do in Minnesota. I don't recall ever pulling a car into a campground and pitching a tent. You usually drove a car to the end of the road and threw your backpack on your back and hiked in the mountains, and we called it mountaineering. So as far as my experience beyond that, last few years, I've taken up backpacking again as a result of COVID. It just brings me back to what I enjoy. And in terms of this trail specifically, I hiked it when I was early teenager with a faith-based group. And it was a 5-day trip, but it was excellent. And that would have been back in the 70s. And backpacking has changed a lot in those years, and so has the trail. In terms of trail knowledge, I backpacked it, and also in my adult life, when I was in the 30s, I mountain biked it in one day. So pretty familiar with the trail. I hiked an offshoot from that a year or so ago, and so not strange territory for me. In terms of moose and bear, I make no claims to be a biologist or have technical knowledge of those such animals, but I've had a number of encounters with moose in Alaska, not only in my childhood and adult life. And the only negative encounter I've had with moose is when it involved a cow and a calf. Otherwise, if you leave them alone, I think you'll be okay. In terms of bears, I've only had one encounter with a brown bear, and that was relatively uneventful. And so again, I don't claim to be an expert on either one, but hopefully we can share some information, experience that might help you as you backpack or hike in areas with large animals. So in terms of where I was and where I was hiking, you can see the circle around South Central Alaska. The Resurrection Pass Trail is roughly, the trailhead is roughly about a 2-hour drive from Anchorage. You can fly to Anchorage from Minneapolis in about 5.5 hours. And they run direct flights between Anchorage and Minneapolis. So it's a pretty easy trip as long as you can arrange transportation between Anchorage and the Resurrection Pass Trail. I will say the Seward Highway, which is a highway that will take you there, must be one of the most beautiful highways, if not the United States, anywhere. It's incredible. If you ever have a chance to go, I would strongly encourage driving between Anchorage and Seward. Okay, let's talk a little about the trail and what I did to prepare for this hike. So a history of the Resurrection Pass Trail. Before highways were built, it was basically the hiking highway or the way to get from Anchorage to the Kenai Peninsula. So it has a lot of history in terms of access before, Alaska blossomed, with population and the oil and so forth. And since then, it's been a primary hiking trail for many, many years. And it's also has history in gold, people panning for gold out of the creeks and so forth in the area. It's 38 miles long. Beginning elevation is 500 feet, and at the pass, it's about 2,600 feet. So roughly 2,000 feet of climbing. So not a lot of elevation, and it stretches out over quite a bit of distance. In terms of training preparation, just my usual routine when I know I have an adventure coming up. I hit the gym a couple, 3 times a week, mountain bike between that, and Barnes Bluff and Red Wing, which is where I live, makes for a nice way to get some hiking in and as we prepare for these kind of adventures. In terms of gear, temperatures in this area at that time were in the 70s and beautiful and sunny, but it could be rainy and dreary and highs in the maybe upper 50s, lower 60s. In terms of cold at night, the rule of thumb is plan a 20-degree sleeping bag or quilt, but I found the 20-degree for this trip was a little too warm, but if it would have been not as nice of weather, it might have been just perfect. In terms of base weight, at my age, yeah, I think a lot about base weight. And I do a lot of things to try and minimize that. My philosophy is carry what you need and make sure you carry what you need to be safe and enjoyable and have a good time. I try to keep my base weight down just to make it easier on myself. And bear spray, of course. Take bear spray. This is a grizzly and black bear country, and hopefully you'll never use it, but have it and have it handy. I carried my bear spray on one shoulder pocket and my water bottle on the other, so it's always easily accessible. And so did my hiking partner. So yes, we do have large mammals in the area, and while they might look scary and ferocious, my general rule is leave them alone and be smart out there, and you'll be fine. Listen to local knowledge, find out what's going on in the area, and take the appropriate precautions. There are certain things that will attract bears to you. For example, food, as you know from Leave No Trace. In the springtime, the bears will tend to come down by the rivers and creeks and start to feed on the salmon. And the moose, they like it in the marshy territories. If you see a moose, they're beautiful animals. Just give them some space and you'll be fine. But again, practice your Leave No Trace concepts. Put your food in a proper storage container when you're not around it, and keep your campsite clean, and also bag up your garbage and have that in a proper odor-proof container also. Oh, wrong direction. Oh, since we're on the topic of food and bears, one thing that I did the last 2 summers for my backpacking trips is identify campsites where we would backpack into that had not only a bear cabinet or a bear box, but also a backcountry latrine. And that really made things a lot easier in terms of what I need to carry and precautions I need to take in terms of critters, and also Leave No Trace. Make noise. When you're going down the trail or in your campground, make noise, be heard. I don't carry a bear bell with me, but we're constantly talking and sing along the trail and jabbering away. And look ahead and around the trail. Don't just look at your feet, although that's important so you don't trip and turn an ankle, but we're always looking down the trail and out to the sides, because you don't want to be surprised coming around a bend and find a large animal. And again, leave them alone, okay? Hopefully you got Zoom on your phone or your camera and use that. Don't try to get that perfect shot, because not only are you putting yourself at risk, but you're putting those animals at risk. You see any questions yet? No? Okay.
Yep, there's a question from Ann. What's your favorite bear canister?
My favorite bear canister, you mean bear spray?
Bear canister. I'm saying.
Oh, for food. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I have the bear boxer, and because the last trips involved the bear boxes at the campsites, I didn't need to use it, but it's a three day can. So obviously that's not going to take you for 5 or 6 or more days, but it's pretty small and light for a bear canister. Did that help answer your question? Great, thanks. So here's a picture of my hiking buddy. This is my youngest son. And as you can see, he's a well-fit individual. He's a military veteran. Thank you for his service. And the reason why I think this picture is kind of important is the next 4 letters, HYOH, HYOH, hike your own hike. And that kind of presented me with some problems on this trip, because I wanted to make sure this is a great trip for him, and I didn't want to slow him down. In terms of weather concerns, the weather was great. As you can see, every day was like that. It was sunny and clear. And when we're hiking, it's the last week of June and the sun is going down. I don't recall seeing it go down. I recall going to bed at 10:30 and the sun is still up. So great days, but even the best days can have trouble, and you just need to simply be ready for those. So we're going to talk about that and how it went. So here's a picture from day one. The first day, we start on the trail between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, and the first probably 3 or 4 miles were a gain of elevation until we got to kind of a flat area for about 10 miles. And you can see it was basically that flat in the alpine territory. Just beautiful country. The sun is out. It's probably in the 70s, dry, and we're drinking a lot of water. Yeah, got another question.
What time of year?
Oh, what time of year? Great question. So we went the last week of June. And the reason why that's a good time is salmon season starts, salmon fishing for sport fishing starts around the second week of July. And so you get a lot of the crowds with fishing. So if you want to fish, that's a good time to go. But in terms of beating the crowds and probably getting a better deal on your airfare, going the last week or two of June is good. But if you go too soon, you might deal with snow up there, and every year is a little bit different. So you got to monitor the weather in the spring and see what kind of snow cover you have and what kind of spring you had. Fortunately, this year, we didn't have as much snow cover up there and a very warm spring. The year before, a lot of snow cover and a slow thaw. So it just depends. Thank you for that question. Good question. So here we are starting the hike. I'm going to back up one day. It was kind of our rest day after travel, and we're visiting relatives, and we went out for a couple bites to eat during the day. And by the end of the day, my tummy wasn't quite feeling quite up to snuff. And I figured I'd be okay by the next morning. The next morning when we get up for the hike and we're all packed up and ready to go, I'm looking at my breakfast, and it's English muffin with peanut butter and jelly and some fresh fruit, coffee and juice, and just your normal typical breakfast. And I'm looking at that and I just have a hard time getting it down. And I didn't realize at that time that maybe something was going on. I was just thinking maybe it was the adrenaline for the hike. And well, we're going to come back to that in a little bit. So here we take a lunch break on day one. Beautiful site. And not only are there campsites along the trail, there are also cabins you can rent, but you have to rent them way out in advance. So you can actually snowshoe or fat bike or ski this in the wintertime, or hike it or mountain bike it in the summertime. So great, beautiful spot there. At that point, my son's having a full lunch and I'm just trying to get down a Cliff Bar. I didn't realize at that point in time, that was not a good sign. But the scenery is great and enjoying life. Go ahead.
Did you travel north to south, south to north? Is there an advantage?
Oh yeah, great question. Thank you. Local knowledge, here we go. So the route from Hope to Cooper Landing, which is southbound. Okay, if you go southbound, it's a gradual climb for about 20 miles, and then you get in the alpine territory for, you know, a handful of miles. You drop out of that, and then you come into this, as you see here, for about 10 or 15 miles until you get off the trail. So I've done it that way, and I've mountain biked it the other way, and I kind of like it going the way we want, which was northbound from Cooper Landing, simply because the first part of that hike was beautiful. The last part of the hike, it's still nice, but you're in the woods, and I kind of prefer the alpine above timberline. But that's a great question too. Northbound or southbound, you really can't go wrong either way. Here's a little bit of insight here. There is a alternate access to the pass called Devil's Pass Trail. If you want to break this into a 2 or 3 day hike rather than maybe a 3 to 5 day hike, that's a great alternative, and you're spending probably a little bit more time above timberline. So at this point, we get here, we continue on for about 5 or 6 more miles where I identified a campsite. We got to the campsite, it was near a lake, there was a water source, there is a bear bin, there is a backcountry latrine, but the campsite was really set deep into the woods. And this is bear territory. And I did not feel comfortable camping deep into the woods without good sight lines and being about a quarter mile isolated from the main trail. So we decided to keep going. And the next stretch was about 2 miles of elevation gain. And that's kind of when things got sketchy for me. So basically what happened is I was feeling the weight of not consuming enough calories, being a little nauseated. And even though we're drinking a lot of water, drink a lot of water without the right nutrients at the same time is not a good mix. And I was feeling it by that evening. But we got to our campsite and we got the next day ready to go. So here we are in day 2. And this is probably my favorite picture of the trip. This is hiking through the pass area, Resurrection Pass. And I'm basically carrying a 40-liter backpack. That's my tent strapped to the top. You guys want to talk a little about gear right now? Let's take a side break for gear. A few kind of favorites of me. So for water, Cadiine Be Free with a 2-liter container. That's worked very well for me, and use that to filter water for both of us for all 3 days and didn't even slow down. Another thing I use, and this is kind of maybe a personal favorite, is see the Summit Wilderness wipes. When you're hot and sweaty and you're trying to cool off, grab one of these larger wipes and it's great. We use it in the Grand Canyon and every hike since then, and it really is nice for just cleaning up and cooling off on a hot day. And finally, the Garmin InReach Mini. It's so important when you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have cell phone access to have some way to call for an emergency situation. I picked this up a couple years ago, and anytime I'm outside of cell phone coverage, I use this and carry it with me. I was able to successfully text to 3 different people, 2 in Alaska and 1 in Minnesota. On all 3 days, I think there was only 1 message that was not picked up, and that was from one of my family members in Alaska. Otherwise, everything else was picked up. Typically, I run it all day, just to have the GPS signal. I'm not doing breadcrumbs. I just monitor GPS, so it's quick to use as a SOS if needed. And then in the evening, when I get to the campsite, I can check the weather, text family, let them know where I'm at and everything's okay. And it's worked great for me. I didn't use a backup battery or nothing. All right, so here we go, day 2. And day 2, we had more elevation, a little bit more elevation, and it was a beautiful day. We got to the other side of the pass and it started getting narrow and dropping down, and we finally had lunch. I had a solid lunch, and then we got to our campsite. I also had a solid dinner, so I'm starting to feel better, at least for my tummy. So we get to our campsite and pitch our tents and settle in for the day. And it was a great campsite. In fact, we developed a little tramway along the way. Some teenagers with a person from Alaska Geographic was leading a group, and they followed us in this campsite also. It was great. It was by a stream, and we met a gentleman. There's also a military veteran. He had hiked the AT a number of years ago, and he shared stories from the AT about how many people are actually hiking that thing, and concerns about water quality as a result of impact humans in that area. And we also shared stories about critter encounters and bear concerns and so forth. And another couple that came in the campsite had wandered about 100 yards past where we were and saw a black bear crossing the trail. And so they decided to not camp here and camp back about a mile another campsite. At that point, our tents are pitched and we're here as a group. We all have bear spray with us, and we felt pretty comfortable at that point. And so we stayed where we're at, and no issues with bear encounters at all. But we did have a human related issue that I think it's important to talk about tonight, and it's going to lead into the Leave No Trace conversation next week. Is we definitely had a landmine in the area, and someone put under a log on top of the dirt and just rolled a log on top, and it was disgusting. And it really drove home the point to me and how important it is for all of us to look out after our natural resources. Even though this is the only time we may pass through one of these unique areas, every time we do this, to make sure we take care of our business and to follow the appropriate methods for sustainability in the outback. Because 50 years ago, we didn't have this kind of traffic. It was not an issue, but now it is. And there's a lot of people on these trails, not only here, but throughout the United States, and being impacted by a lot of that traffic. So it's very important to be aware. And I'm going to give you a couple ideas on how to reduce your impact on the environment a little bit later. So here we go, day 3. So first day, roughly 16 miles. The next day, I think, was about 10 or 11. And I think we had, roughly 13, if my math is correct, for the third day to hike out. Pretty much mainly downhill, easy hike, wide trail, well maintained. Getting close to finish, everything's looking good. I was having some knee discomfort down the way, and that was bothering me, but we worked through it. And diagnosed later, it might be some IT band strain. And so I think we just pushed a little bit too hard on day 1, and it came back to haunt me. So lesson learned from this trip: careful what you eat when traveling. Stick with what you know. Listen to your body. If your body is telling you you need to do something, whether it's regarding eating or whatever, take heed and make those adjustments along the way. And be prepared for anything. Mishaps are inevitable. And I've had very good fortune on many of my hikes. And this is the first time I really had a mishap. And it kind of threw me off. I was wondering if this is really something for me anymore. So I had to take another look and, reassess situation, connect with people that are close to me. And they said, Chris, you need to keep doing this. But I need to get back in the saddle, and how am I going to do that? Well, one thing I identified is there was a couple of great Rovers volunteer opportunities last month. And I just want to talk about that. Pam and Gary and everyone that helped out with the border route trail this August. It was a great experience, and it was a way for me to push myself again and make sure that, hey, I can continue to do these kind of things. And it was such a positive experience. Just want to hand out to everyone that participated in that trail maintenance. It was a great experience for me, and thank you for that. The following weekend, I don't know how I did it, but I signed up for 2 volunteer opportunities in a row, 2 weekends. And I helped out with Sarah and the beginner backpack group at Afton State Park for an overnight. And that was an awesome trip too, because all the beginner backpackers were just incredible and excited. And even though we had some really tough weather that night, everyone came out of it looking good and happy, and that was a great trip. So it was a good positive lift for me, and reassured me that, hey, let's continue to do these trips because it's great. It's a great experience. So now we're planning for next year. All right, let's get back to reduce our impact on the environment. And again, I don't claim to be an expert on this, but these are just my own thoughts and opinions. So take them for what you will and go from there. There seems to be a lot of information in the media and in print about bucket list trails, how you have to go here, you have to go there. It's these 5 hikes you have to do before whatever. And they're probably great trails, and yeah, they're great trails. But the more we advertise bucket list trails, the more those trails are going to be impacted. And there's a lot of great places to hike in this world that aren't necessarily the top 10. And you're still going to have a great time and a great experience. Find those trails, and you're probably going to get a little bit more solitude and have a little bit less impact on the environment. Hikers not following, leave no trace. Yeah, that's disgusting. And by doing all the work here with this group and educating the people, that helps reduce that. So keep all your good work in that area going. And the last one is, are cat holes the answer? Well, they're better than nothing. But if you can find campsites with a backcountry latrine, that's certainly less impactful on the environment than digging your own hole and putting it in there. And in fact, I reached out to Leave No Trace and got their opinion on this. And they assured me, yes, use those backcountry latrines, because even though it's work to carry the stuff out, at least you're not spreading it all over the environment. And then finally, day hikes. Really? Well, yeah. I mean, if you're just getting into hiking and backpacking, and maybe some of that is intimidating to you, and day hikes is a great way to have less impact on the environment, but get a chance to explore some amazing places without the logistical or the cost factors involved. Now, nothing can replace backpacking. Going out for a handful of days in the outback and carrying everything you need on your back is an amazing experience. And nothing can replace that. But let's talk about day hikes. So here's my oldest son from March of this year, Grand Canyon. We hiked 3 miles down. That's 2,000 feet of elevation change and back up in that day. It was a great trip. Yeah, if you can hike all the way down to Phantom Ranch and camp overnight, that's awesome. But you got to deal with all the reservations and so forth. And it was an awesome trip. In fact, we packaged out of 2 days of hiking, a day hiking in Sedona and a day hiking in Grand Canyon. A little bit more eye candy from Arizona. Isn't that beautiful? All right, here we go. Year before, we made a trip through Colorado. If you've ever been to Western Colorado, Paradise, just east of Parita, is a great place to hike. And as you can see, they have vineyards too. Back up to my home state. This spot right here was about 6 miles from the trailhead. So this was a day hike. Got a little attitude in that picture, don't we? All right, and here's another day hike, Crow Pass Trail. This is part of the original Iditarod, and you can reach the Crow Pass in a day. They do this trail as an overnight, maybe a 2 or 3 day overnight, and also as a marathon run. The other side of this pass, and here we get back to trail knowledge, between Crow Pass and Anchorage is a lot of bear traffic, but between Goodwood and Crow Pass, not so much, and it's still beautiful. So, any more questions? If we don't have any more questions, I want to thank every one of you. Oh, we got a question? Go ahead.
What kind of tents did you use?
Okay, what kind of tents we use? We both carried our own one-person tents. I was carrying a tarp tent notch, and that's worked great. In fact, it held up really well in the bad storm at Apton State Park. And my son was using my spare mid tent, which, hey, someone just picked up from the Rover's swap meet a couple of weeks ago. So someone got a great deal on that tent. I'm just whittling them down to just what I need at home. And that picture is from Gore Creek Trail, and that's just outside of Vail, Colorado. It's a great place to hike if you like to get in the alpine territory, and it's only 2 hours from Denver. Go ahead. More questions.
Pam Johnson asks, can you repeat the name of the trail that you said, just as beautiful but less bear travel, 2 slides before this one?
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, here we go. So Crow Pass Trail. Crow Pass Trail goes between Girdwood, Alaska, which is about a 40-minute drive from Anchorage, and Anchorage. Actually, it dumps out Eagle River. So on the Girdwood side, it's there's not as much bear travel. In fact, I've never heard of a bear issue on that side, or very rarely. But on the Eagle River side, because there's a river that's salmon are in, they're going for the food supply. And also Eagle River is expanding area of Anchorage, kind of a subdivision. And so you got people encroaching in the wilderness with garbage and those things, and you got bears coming down to feed on the salmon. So kind of a perfect storm. And we hear about a lot of bear encounters in that area. Thanks. Great question, Pam.